All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar, Avoiding Fraud and Scams. My name is Kelly Schweppe, and I'm the Program Marketing Specialist here at General Electric Credit Union. We're so glad you've joined us this evening for an awesome topic, and we have a lot of great content ahead. We're excited to continue to bring you insight right from the comfort of your home, work, or wherever you are this evening. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Todd Lindgren with the Cincinnati FBI to introduce himself and take us through tonight's topic.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight, Kelly. I really appreciate General Electric Credit Union hosting this presentation. Again, my name is Todd Lindgren, and I've been with the FBI for the last 12 years and serve as the Public Affairs Officer for the Cincinnati Division. So in part of this role, it includes speaking to community groups about the FBI and working to help prevent crime through community awareness presentations like this. So I wanted to talk just a moment about the FBI. Most people will never have contact with an FBI agent or employee, but we have over 30,000 people working across the nation and the globe to help keep people safe on a daily basis. The FBI's mission is to protect the American people and defend the Constitution of the United States. And this includes protecting the public from scams and financial crimes. One of our top criminal priorities is preventing and investigating financial fraud. That could be everything from the billion-dollar Bernie Madoff type Ponzi schemes to embezzlements and common frauds. So our goal tonight is really to help raise awareness about some of the frauds and scams that we see on a regular basis so that you don't become a victim. So if everyone's ready, let's get started. So the Internet Crime Complaint Center, or IC3.gov, was created by the FBI and other agencies over 20 years ago, and it really serves as a clearinghouse for fraud reporting. They look at the frauds being reported and they bundle similar cases and then refer a lot of those cases to the appropriate law enforcement agency for investigation. So if you encounter a fraud situation online or over the phone or through other means, we recommend it be reported to IC3.gov for further review. IC3 also collects a lot of data on the frauds that are reported to them, and so it's a good resource to look for common frauds and trends in frauds and scams. So according to their latest statistics that were just released last week for the year 2020, if you look back over the last 5 years, there have been over 2.2 million complaints of scams and frauds that total over $13 billion in losses. So we want to help prevent these types of frauds from occurring and work to reduce these losses, and that's why we're talking about this topic here tonight. So unfortunately, Ohio is pretty prominent in some of these statistics. We are 12th on the list of states with the most victims. In 2020, there was over 13,400 victims who reported frauds to IC3 from Ohio. And Ohio was 5th in the amount for losses, over 170 million. And if you average that out, that's over $12,000 per victim on average. So as you can see from these statistics, our friends and neighbors are losing a lot of money due to frauds and scams. So this slide is showing the top frauds by the type of scam. And you can see that phishing and other forms of phishing, like farming, vishing, smishing, all kinds of fun names, those are the top scams in terms of number of victims last year. Now, you may know that phishing is the act of sending an email that claims to be from a legitimate business or entity, but the real attempt there is to deceive the recipient into divulging some sort of personal, sensitive information. So lots of times it'll include a link, and they're trying to get your passwords or credit card numbers or bank account information. And this link takes you to a specific website. It might appear real, but is really set up for an attempt to steal your information. And we'll talk a little bit more about this type of scam in a little bit. So this chart shows that the amount of money lost attributed to each type of scam last year. And so the BEC scam, or business email compromise, is at the top with a whopping $1.8 billion reported loss last year, almost $2 billion. BEC usually targets businesses or schools and nonprofit groups, generally organizations that wire or transfer money to different vendors or contractors electronically. So fortunately, it's not a scam that usually targets individuals. And if if companies or organizations fall victim to this, there are some tools we can use to try and stop this, but there's certain thresholds that have to be met. We have to be notified very quickly, and it has to meet a certain dollar threshold as well. But you can see, I mean, almost $2 billion, that is a tremendous amount of money being lost through that method. If you look at the second type of fraud there by victim loss, romance scams, almost $600 million was lost last year in romance or confidence fraud scams. We know that a lot of victims of these types of scams don't report that they've been victimized because they're pretty embarrassed that they fell for this type of scam. So the actual amount lost due to romance scams was probably even much higher. Now let's talk a little bit about how these types of frauds occur. As you can imagine, they occur in many ways, including on the computer, whether it's emails, internet sites, different apps, through the standard snail mail, could be written fraud schemes sent straight to your mailbox or other offers. On the phone, we often see callers who spoof phone numbers to make it look like they're calling from somewhere legitimate, and they're asking for some sort of money, or sometimes they're even pretending to be some sort of government agency and they're threatening you with arrest or tax liens, things like that, unless you pay them money. Then we still see frauds occurring in person too. Things like healthcare fraud and things like that can still be carried out in person. They're not necessarily as common these days because it's a lot easier for these fraudsters to remain anonymous, hiding online or over the phone, where it's a little harder to track them down. So we're going to talk about some of the different fraud schemes that we see quite often. Things like credit card fraud, elder fraud, which is a pretty big category, healthcare fraud, identity theft, and internet fraud. So first, let's talk about credit card fraud. Most adults carry some sort of credit card. And because of that, the fraudsters have found a way to try and exploit that. So credit card fraud is very, very common. It's probably been in existence since the first credit cards were issued. And by definition, it is really just the unauthorized use of a credit card to obtain something of value. So when General Electric Credit Union or the issuer of your card provides you with a card, you can make regular purchases, and on a monthly basis, you probably get a bill, and you make payments on that bill to pay it off the balance or have some sort of revolving credit. But your agreement with the issuer probably lists certain purchases that you may not be responsible for if you become the victim of fraud. If this occurs, the most important thing to do is really to report the fraud as soon as possible, so they can put some sort of hold on your transactions, issue a new card and a new number, and then you can talk to them about what transactions you actually made and what might be fraudulent transactions. Now, credit card numbers are pretty easily stolen from websites. You can go to a legitimate website, and there's plenty of illegitimate ones out there that look real and make some sort of purchase, but they're also stolen at the point of sale. If you think about it, when you go to a restaurant, I know for a lot of us, it's been a while since we've been out to a nice restaurant during this health crisis, but when you do go to a restaurant and you hand the waiter or waitress your credit card and they disappear for a few minutes to take care of your bill, you're putting a lot of trust in them. You don't really know what they're doing with your credit card. You hope that they're just swiping it and printing your bill, and that's it. But we've seen cases where workers may copy your card information and try to make purchases online using your credit card. A lot of telemarketing scams are also trying to get your credit card information over the phone. So if you're ever called by anyone and they ask for your credit card number, be very, very careful. You may not even know this, but out on the internet, on a place called the dark web, these websites that are kind of hard to find, you have to use a special router to get there. But it's incredibly cheap for criminals to buy real credit card numbers out there. A credit card number can sell for about $20. And they don't just get the number, they get the number, they get your card expiration date, they get the CVV code on the back, they get information about the card holder, like the address, the zip code, all the details they would need to make purchases on your card. They can get that for about $20 and then go out to the internet and make their own purchases using your information. So I'm going to switch on to elder fraud right now. And sadly, older Americans continue to be targets of frauds and abuse. We see that seniors are often targets because they tend to be more trusting. They've accumulated probably a financial nest egg of some sort. They tend to have good credit, and have more assets in general. And since the fraudsters are looking for potential victims with money, they often target seniors. So last year, the Internet Crime Complaint Center received over 100,000 complaints from victims over the age of 60, with adjusted losses in excess of $966 million. So that is quite a lot of money. If you average that out, that's over $9,600 per victim in these types of senior fraud scams that we're seeing. So there's a number of scams that fall under the larger heading of senior fraud or elder fraud. We're going to discuss a few of them, including the Grandparent Scam, the Sweepstakes lottery scam, and the tech support scam. So the Grandparent Scam first. That's something we often see around this time of year. It's usually over the phone or through text messages, and in this scam, a criminal will call or text posing as a relative. It's often they're often posing as a child or more likely a grandchild, and they claim that something really bad has happened to them, like they got arrested by the police or their car broke down on a long trip, and they need money right away. So they ask you to wire them money or send gift card numbers right away because of their situation of being in jail or being broken down on the road or some other issue. And the scammers are pretty smart. They often call at night to wake their victims and make it sound like it's a real emergency. And they pressure the victims into making a decision when they may be a little groggy from just waking up. They might not be thinking straight. And like I said, they also target these peak times like spring break when a lot of grandchildren may be out visiting Florida or other places for spring break. The grandparents know that their grandchildren may be traveling, and so the fraudsters really prey on this to make it seem more believable. So if you ever receive a call like this, it's really best just to slow down first. You can ask the person calling, what the number is that they're calling from, so you can call them back. And then I'd call a trusted relative, like the grandchild's parents. Ask if their child is traveling and if they've reached out to other people for help. The scammers, they'll often ask that you don't call the parents or relatives, and they'll make it sound like they're worried that they're going to get in trouble. Remember, they're pretending to be the grandchild lots of times, and they don't want their parents to get angry if you call them. But that's okay. It's better to call and verify with people you trust than to send any money. And it's also important, like I said, to slow down. Don't get rushed into any decision. Take time to really confirm what is occurring. And a general warning here, lots of times these scammers will ask you to send them gift card numbers or these prepaid money card numbers like a green dot card. If you ever get asked for something like that, especially over the phone or through text, it's almost always a scam. These cards are really easy for fraudsters to turn into cash, and they're kind of difficult for law enforcement to trace. So the scammers will ask you to purchase these cards and either send them to them or send the information electronically or over the phone so they can go cash them on their end and have your money before you can even contact law enforcement and realize it's a scam. So another scam that targets older Americans is the lottery and sweepstakes scam. So you might receive a call or a text saying that you won some sort of trip to an exotic location or an amount of cash. But in order to collect that prize, there's a catch. You have to provide a credit card number or some other form of payment to cover the taxes or other fees, they call them. And I know if you're like me, we'd all like the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes crew to come knocking on our door with that giant check telling us we won lots of money. But sadly, that's probably not going to happen. But there are people out there who are trying to take our money. These scammers are pretty savvy, and they prey upon seniors with these types of scams. So if you didn't enter a sweepstakes or a lottery, you probably didn't win one, right? Any kind of legitimate organization won't ask for money or credit card number up front if you win a prize. So be smart, don't give out your money or your personal information, and avoid being scammed in this way. So another ongoing fraud is the tech support scam. IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Centers, received over 15,000 of these complaints last year with a total loss of $146 million. This was a really big increase from the previous year, almost 3 times as much. So this scam continues to grow and steal a lot of people's money. I don't have a good reason why it almost tripled in the amount lost last year, other than people were home a lot more and on their computers a lot more, and that might have been the reason. Unfortunately, the majority of the victims of tech support scams were older Americans. The fraudsters believe that seniors may be more trusting, like I mentioned before, but also less tech savvy, so they prey on them as targets. And you may know that this scam revolves around someone often contacting you over the phone about a computer issue. They claim they're from a computer company's tech support or their security division or customer support. They often claim that there's an issue with your computer and ask for your personal information and passwords, or they might even ask to remotely take over control of your computer under the pretext of trying to fix your problem. Now, if you give them access to your computer, think about it. Your computer is kind of like your filing cabinet, right? You have all kinds of records probably on your computer. And if you provide them access or passwords, you're giving them access to all the files and information on your computer. And that could be your banking records, your tax returns, anything that could be stored there, they can have access to. It's important that you never give control of your computer to someone unless you initiated the call to technical services and looked up a legitimate phone number for the company you want to contact. So if you're having an issue with your computer and you reach out for that company and they want to take control, that's one thing. But if someone calls you and says, hey, we notice you might be having issues with your computer, make sure you never give them any passwords or control of your computer. So another version of this includes some sort of malware on your computer. It's called ransomware, and you may have heard of that. And basically, you could be surfing the internet and come across some site, and then all of a sudden, you receive a pop-up window on your screen stating that your computer has been infected. And in order for this to go away, you have to pay some sort of fee. We call it ransomware because they're basically taking your files and putting under ransom. Lately, one variation that's been going around actually says that you've viewed some sort of illegal photos involving the exploitation of children, and that the FBI is going to arrest you unless you pay a fee right away. And these are scams. They should be ignored. Anytime something pops up on your computer asking for money, or again, green dot cards or things like that, it's a scam. If the pop-up won't go away, you might have a virus on your computer, so you do want to talk to someone you trust about a possible fix. Sometimes there are programs online that can help remove these malware programs from your machine, or you can always take it to a legitimate repair shop that you trust. So this is a press release from a case a few months ago in which a man was prosecuted for pretending to be a tech support agent trying to help remove malware from victims' computers. So he was kind of like that person I just talked about. He was pretending to be from some sort of computer company, calling people, saying they had some sort of issue on their computer, and he was there to fix it. But in reality, he was a scammer. He stole people's personal banking information off their computers and passed it to accomplices who were able to loot their accounts. And the intended loss here was over $600,000, and unfortunately, all the victims were over age 65. Fortunately, we were able to catch up with him and arrest him, and he is now going to jail for the scams that he promoted. So the Department of Justice maintains a national elder fraud hotline. This is the number here, and if you believe you're a victim of an elder fraud crime, you can always call 1-833-FRAUD-11 to report the crime. It's 1-833-FRAUD-11 to report any kind of elder fraud. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about healthcare fraud. Healthcare fraud really continues to grow at a rapid pace as the healthcare industry and healthcare services grow as well. In healthcare fraud schemes, we see people in the government losing money through a variety of different types of scams. Often what the scammer wants is your healthcare information, basically your insurance information. And then they may try to bill programs like Medicare and Medicaid for services that you never actually received. And these scammers can be pretty creative. They can acquire your insurance information in different ways, but some methods to be especially cautious of are offers for free screenings that don't come from legitimate community organizations or your local government. If there's health fairs in your community that include free screenings and they're sponsored by organizations you know and you trust that are part of the community, then you're probably fine. But if you encounter some sort of group offering free screenings and they want your medical information, I'd be very cautious of that. There are groups also out there that may offer you some sort of incentive to visit specific clinics. You may have seen these flyers or postcards that advertise that you can get a free gift card to a restaurant or your favorite retail store just by visiting their clinic for a free consultation. Well, as you probably know, nothing in life is really free, and what these people want is access to your health insurance information so they can try to scam you and the government. So be very wary of these free offers, especially if they're from practices you're not familiar with and that are established in your community. There are definitely some steps you can take so you're not a victim of healthcare fraud. And the first is always protect your health insurance information. Only provide it to healthcare professionals that you know and you trust. Also, it's important to never sign blank authorization forms stating that the provider can bill your insurance company for whatever they decide to list on the form. I also recommend talking to the provider about what services are needed and their costs up front. You want to know, before you receive any services, what you may be billed out of pocket and what your insurance company may be required to pay. It's also really good practice to keep records of your medical appointments and the services that you've received. It's also good practice to review your statements from your healthcare providers as well as your insurance statements to make sure you understand what is listed and that you actually receive those services. Now remember, these scammers are targeting you, but they're also targeting the government through false billing to Medicare and Medicaid. And the health bills that we receive, they can be confusing. So if you have questions about services that you did or did not receive, seek out help from a trusted source that might be able to help you decipher some of that. So another form of fraud that will not seem to go away is identity theft. And this occurs when someone uses your identity. It's often a social security number or some sort of other official identification to commit a crime. We often see people trying to open credit cards or take out loans with another person's identity. It's important to review your banking and credit statements to look for any abnormal transactions, just like you should review your healthcare statements. If you're concerned about something on your statement, you can always report it to your bank or credit card company as soon as possible. It's also a good idea to review your credit report at least once a year to look for any irregularities. And I certainly believe that shredding personal documents can make it harder for people to steal your information. Like I mentioned before, a lot of identity theft and other information is stolen now through online means. Could be a data breach of a company or some sort of computer network, but I still think it's a good idea to shred personal documents because the harder you make it for someone to scam you, I say the better. So speaking of online data breaches, internet fraud is pretty much everywhere. There's so much information out there as people shop and do business online. It's not surprising that the scammers have moved online as well. And this could probably be a whole separate presentation, but I'm just going to highlight a couple areas to look out for. And one of those is phishing, which I mentioned before in the statistics from ic3.gov. And phishing is one of those scams that has been around for a real long time, basically as long as there's been email, but continues to work. They just make different variations of it. It usually involves receiving some sort of email from a company or service that you use, asking you to update either your password, or your credit card information, or your personal information. And the scammers want you to click a link that they've embedded in that email. And that's going to take you to some sort of website where they can capture your information. And the messages, they can look very real and legitimate, but it's important not to click any of these links in these emails. I've seen emails that imitate Apple and Amazon and large banks and all kinds of different companies, and they use very real looking language to sound authoritative, but also they'll copy the logos from these companies in these emails, so they look real. But if you receive something like this and think it might be legitimate, again, it's really important not to click on the link. Instead, it's good to open a separate browser on your computer, go to your account, type in the web address, go to your account, don't click on the links, and see if there's any issues with your account. Or if you're not sure about that, you can always call the company yourself and just ask if your accounts are okay. So another top internet fraud involves not receiving something you purchased online or the item being misrepresented, like in this photo here. So if you make purchases online, just be sure you're always using trustworthy retailers. It's also a good idea to use a credit card and never wire money. So if you never receive your item, your credit card company may not force you to pay for it. Of course, this depends on their fraud policies. It's in the statement that you sign when you open that credit card, but a lot of companies will cover fraudulent purchases. So if you see a deal on a website that seems too good to be true, like this motorcycle and tricycle, it probably is. It's best to just avoid these types of scams, even if they look like some sort of once-in-a-lifetime deal. Otherwise, you might end up with that tiny tricycle when you really wanted the fancy motorcycle. So I'm going to cover just a few more frauds here that we commonly see. I mentioned at the beginning that victims of romance scams reported losing over $600 million last year. And this is kind of how those scams work. So usually people meet online, often on some sort of legitimate internet dating sites, and they start some sort of conversation. And the scammers, they're really pros. They know how to quickly gain the victim's trust. They seem very caring. They seem very genuine and believable. There's a lot of people out there looking for someone to talk to and some sort of companionship, and the scammers know this. And they really prey on people's emotions and their trust and take that to their advantage. So as these online relationships progress, oftentimes the scammers will actually ask you to move off the legitimate dating site and start using some sort of messenger app or start texting, because that's how they prefer to communicate. But what we see lots of times is when the person involved in the relationship wants to meet the person who they think's the love of their life, who's really a scammer, the scammer always comes up with some sort of reason why they can't meet or they can't video chat. And often it's because they say they're overseas or they work for the military and they can't meet in person. But they continue to build up this relationship for weeks and months. And then at some point, there's a request for some sort of money. They might ask for funds for like a plane ticket to come see the person. They might say that they're having healthcare issues, they need help with doctor's bills, or they need help paying rent or some other financial reason. But by this time, the victim is really attached to their online love and they really want to help the person. And that's where the scammers are experts in developing these relationships and stringing along the victims while they can take as much money as they can. So a few tips on these to avoid these scams. Just be very careful about the personal information you post online. The less information you put out there, the better. Also, it's good to research the other individual and even look for photos of them online. Lots of times scammers will take photographs that they find on the internet and send them to their online romantic partner saying this is what they really look like, when they're really just stock photos. And you can do photo searches on the internet. If you see that picture repeatedly, that might be a good giveaway that you're dealing with a scammer. As in any relationship, I think it's always really good to go slow in these encounters and look for some of these warning signs. And one key one is just that the person says that they can't meet in person or that they're out of the country. If they start asking you for financial information or some sort of financial support, these are all big red flags. And if you have any doubts, just talk to someone you trust and who knows you well. If you tell them about this relationship, see what they think. See if they think it's legitimate. In the end, just remember, I would never send money to someone you've never met in person. So this is another recent press release to show you that these scams are happening every day. In this case, 3 men were arrested after scamming dozens of older women out of $500,000. And some of the funds were actually transferred to Nigeria, which I think indicates that these men were probably part of a larger international crime ring. And the release says that they were pretending to be high-ranking military officers stationed overseas. So it's a good excuse so they could never actually meet their online romantic partners in person. But it's also one of those red flags. If the person can't meet in person, then there's something wrong there. And that should be an indication to you that it's probably a scam. All right, so switching gears, you may have also heard of some of these government impersonation scams. In these scams, you receive a phone call stating that you owe the government money. And it could be for an unpaid tax bill or fines from a local court. There's a number of different varieties. There's one going around right now that says someone stole your identity and they're using it in drug trafficking and the DEA needs you to pay fines immediately. So many of these calls really spoof government phone numbers to make them look legitimate on your caller ID. That's very easy to do, to spoof a phone number these days, so it looks like some government agency is calling you when it's actually the scammer. And a lot of these can be really threatening. They might say that you'll be arrested and put in jail if you do not pay right away. So they really use high pressure tactics to get you to give them some sort of money. And they also use these threats of liens on your house or going to jail or repossessing your car, things like that, so that you'll try and pay right away. If you ever receive one of these calls, it's best just to hang up. The government's never going to call you asking you to pay a fine. If you really did owe some sort of money to the government, you'd receive a formal letter with contact information, details of your case that you could easily verify. So remember, these are scams and you don't want to pay the money. This is a press release detailing another recent case. This was an Illinois man who was sentenced to 40 months in prison for this type of fraud. So he called people claiming to be with the IRS and threatened to arrest them if they didn't immediately pay fines. He told victims to pay using these stored value cards or money pack cards, which is a big red flag. And this fraudster's connected to over $800,000 that was stolen from victims. Again, he was pretending to be from the IRS and threatening these people over the phone to send money quickly to avoid any kind of repercussions. So another issue we're seeing often is a type of phishing related to package delivery services. So these delivery scams are popping up in both email form and text form. We all like to receive packages, I know I do, from FedEx or UPS or the Postal Service, and this one really exploits that. These photos show just a couple of examples of what you might see. So users can receive a text or an email that states that the service couldn't deliver a package or that some sort of new tracking information has been created. And they're told to click on the link for more details. And again, this link will take you to a site that looks legitimate, but the scammers control it and they ask you to update your personal information. And that's information that's valuable to fraudsters. So again, don't click on links and unsolicited messages like that, whether they come from email, text, whatever form. If you're really expecting some sort of package, or you recently maybe tried to send a package to someone, you can open up your web browser and go to that company's website or call their customer service to confirm the authenticity of the message. The bad guys want you to click on the links in their messages, but I'm asking you, please don't do it, because that's how they gain access to your information. And the final scam I'd like to discuss is charity and disaster fraud. So unfortunately, when bad things happen, like hurricanes and earthquakes and other disasters, many of us are moved to donate money to these relief efforts, but the fraudsters play on this good intention of donors. And after these kind of disasters, there's usually a spike in this type of fraud as well. So some people out there are soliciting donations for legitimate organizations, but then there's other people out there who are soliciting donations for organizations that do no real work. And they may have a charity name and a bank account, but they don't have volunteers, they don't have employees who are going to use that money you donate to help those in need. Instead, they're just trying to scam you out of the money that you had intended to help others. So these frauds can come in many forms. We see them through email, social media posts, those crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe and things like that. Sometimes cold calls just on the phone, people saying they're from some sort of agency collecting money after a disaster, and they're in other forms as well. So in order to avoid becoming a victim of these scams, I really recommend that you just give to an established charity whose work you know and trust. Be aware that some of the scammers are pretty good at creating fake charities using names that are pretty similar to legitimate aid groups. So if you plan to give it to some sort of organization that you're not familiar with, it's always a good idea to research the group's track record. The Better Business Bureau, along with several online charity sites, offer rankings of these charitable groups, and you can search those to see if the organization is legitimate. If you're not familiar with the organization and they ask you to donate through cash or gift cards or virtual currency or a wire transfer, it's probably a scam. As you probably know, legitimate charities, they'll take credit cards, they'll take checks, and they'll offer you a receipt for your records. So as with any type of giving, I'd urge you to be cautious and do your homework. So I've talked quite a bit about some of the common fraud schemes, and hopefully I didn't overload you with these types of scams and frauds, but the fraudsters are very creative and are always coming up with new ways to steal your hard-earned money. So let's talk a little bit more about preventing frauds in general. I mentioned this earlier, and it's worth repeating. Never respond to unsolicited emails, texts, calls that ask for your personal information. Unless you initiated that interaction and you're dealing with someone you really trust, please don't provide your personal information. When it comes to things like emails and texts, be very cautious of attachments or links from senders you don't know and trust. Again, they can carry malicious code that can harm your computer or direct you to some sort of website that will try to steal your information. Remember, these scammers are very savvy. They will copy emails, they'll copy websites to make them look legitimate, but it's important that we don't fall for them. So it's also important to just be alert for these potential phishing attacks, like the UPS and FedEx package delivery example we discussed. There's a lot of variations of these out there, and they're all really attempting to gain your personal information, but they may use a little different language or different photos, things like that. Also be leery of social engineering, which are attempts to manipulate people just into revealing personal information that may be used for fraudulent purposes. If you've ever seen some of those surveys on social media where they ask you to list fun facts like the year you graduated or your first pet's name, your first car, things like that, those are fun. But if you think about it, those questions match up to questions that legitimate websites often use when you need to recover your password. And that's not a coincidence. It's a form of social engineering the scammers use to try to get you to reveal important personal facts they might be able to use to commit some sort of fraud. So if you see those sort of things on social media, Facebook and things like that, it's fun to look at them, but I wouldn't answer them and I wouldn't post your answers publicly because that's what the fraudsters want. I believe I also mentioned before, that's a good idea to check your credit reports to look for suspicious activity. And you can get one free credit report from each of the 3 reporting agencies per year through annualcreditreport.com. You can request one from all 3 credit reporting agencies at once if you want to see what they're all saying. Or if you want to continuously monitor your credit year-round, you can request one every 3 or 4 months from one of the agencies, and that way you can monitor your credit on an annual basis. Also, if you see fraudulent activity and believe you're a victim, it's important to report it immediately to your financial institution. It's also recommended that you notify the 3 credit reporting bureaus, and you can ask for a fraud alert to be placed on your credit history. And this will instruct them to contact you if someone tries to open a credit card or a loan or other financial instrument in your name. If you're a victim of identity theft, you can also contact the IRS to fill out an identity theft affidavit, which notifies the government that you're a victim and alerts them if someone tries to file a tax return in order to receive your tax refund. So identitytheft.gov has additional resources that can help you navigate this process if you are a victim of identity theft. It's also important that you report any fraud like this to law enforcement. If it's a phone, email, or internet scheme, again, we recommend you use ic3.gov to report that information. As I mentioned, IC3 basically bundles these cases together. They look for commonalities and they refer to them to the appropriate law enforcement agency for potential investigation. So finally, I want to end with some good general practices. I always tell people to trust your instincts. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. If that item you want is $100 at the retail store and you see it for $25 on a website, that's probably a scam. So I would just walk away from any temptation to make this a great deal. Also slow down. Scammers are really often trying to create a false sense of urgency to get you to make a poor decision. It's especially true in some of the phone scams where they're talking directly to you. They'll elevate their intensity, they'll add stress, they'll yell to make the situation to their advantage and to try to get you to give them what they want, which is your money. So it's important just to slow down, think through the situation. Don't let someone pressure you into anything. It's okay to hang up or to say you need more time. It's also important to ask questions and do research. Scammers don't want to answer a lot of questions. They want you to just say yes and send them the money. So if you're not sure, ask a lot of questions and then try to verify those through other means, through people you trust and things like that. And that brings me to the next one. Just people you trust in your life, consult them if you're not sure. There's a lot of good people out there that genuinely want to help. And if you're unsure about a situation, just ask someone you trust for their opinion. It could be a friend, a neighbor, a family member. Chances are they're going to guide you in the right direction if you just ask. And finally, it's always okay to say no. Don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to walk away or just hang up on these scammers. to be honest, they're motivated by greed, and they'll do just about anything to get your hard-earned money. So it's okay to say no and even be impolite about it. Now, that may go against your character, but you're dealing with some very shady people. They don't have feelings. They only have a desire to steal your money. So you're a potential victim to them, and when you hang up, they're going to move on to the next person they will try to victimize. They don't really have feelings, so it's okay just to say no or walk away. To end, I really just want to say, be smart. Use your instincts and the resources around you to maintain the money you have. Law enforcement and those around you care. We don't want you to become a victim. So if you want to learn more about these topics, there's some additional information on our website listed here, fbi.gov. We also post information on scams and other resources on our Twitter page, which is at FBI Cincinnati. Thank you.
Great, and we can go ahead and move into the Q&A portion. I have a couple that were pre-submitted. If anybody on the call has a question, please enter that in your questions feature and I can get that asked. The first question we have is, what if I report something and it turns out to not be a scam? Are there any repercussions of that?
No, if you're reporting something that you honestly think might be a scam or fraud and it gets looked into and it turns out it's not, that's okay. There's no repercussion for you. It's more important that you, if you're unsure, that you do report it, and we'd certainly encourage that.
Great. And then I had one other question. Again, if anybody has a question, please submit that in the question feature and I can get that asked after this one. Can you touch on what not to post on social media? I know you touched on that a little bit earlier, but if you could just go over that again.
Sure. So what not to avoid, or what to avoid posting on social media? I think that's a very personal question. It's something that you need to think about. I personally don't have social media accounts because I'm very private and I'm kind of leery of the information that is out there. So if you have these accounts, I definitely would limit them to only people you know can see the information that you post. Most of these sites have different security settings, and you can allow anyone to see what you post, or you can allow only your closer group of friends to see what you post. So I definitely lock that down as much as possible so that only your kind of inner circle of online friends can see that. But in that same token, if you don't know someone in real life, I wouldn't necessarily let them be your friend online. I tell the same thing to kids when I talk to them about kind of stranger danger kind of things. If you don't know someone in real life, or you don't know them well, maybe just have run into them once or twice, and they request to be your friend on social media, I'd be leery of that. But you've probably heard some of these things before to avoid. It's always good not to post photos when you're out of town. So those beach vacation photos that hopefully we'll all be taking this summer, wait till you get back in town before posting those. Criminals do surf these kind of sites, and when they see that people are out of town, they might try to break into your house. So just hang off on the vacation selfies and wait till you get back home. Also, like I mentioned before, kind of be leery of some of these online quizzes that ask questions about what high school you went to, or what kind of pets you have, or their names, because these can be social engineering schemes in disguise. So be kind of careful of that. But again, it's a very personal decision what you post and don't post. I've chosen not to have social media sites just because I prefer to be more private and protect my information as opposed to putting it out there, but it is a personal decision.
Awesome. That concludes our webinar for this evening. Thank you all and enjoy the rest of your night.